And welcome back to North American Vintage Champs. Going into round 7 here, I am Kevin Crone with Luis Scott Vargas. And the hits just keep on coming, Luis. We've got a really, really cool matchup of two decks we haven't seen on camera yet today. I'm pretty excited.
Yeah,
First
we've
and
got.
foremost, go ahead.
I was going to say we've got actual Dredge to watch.
That's right. We keep referring to it, and yet here we have it. First and foremost, let's thank our sponsors, though, for this event. As you know, Card Titan bringing us the whole show, and they have a discount code good for 10% off this weekend. That code is Eternal Weekend 2023. So hit them up at their site. We also have GameGenic giving us the same code, Eternal Weekend 2023, for the same discount, 10% off of your supplies. So do take a look at GameGenic for this weekend. We can talk briefly about our archetypes for this match. We've got Dredge versus Breach. Here we have Mark Tobias, and notably, Mark has been making the rounds for all of the international Eternal Weekends this year. Incredibly, Prague and Japan, fantastic stuff with an excellent performance in Prague. And this is a deck we haven't seen on the tables yet today, Underworld Breach. Luis, I'm sure you have a lot of experience with the card Underworld Breach across multiple formats. What do you think of when you see this archetype in Vintage?
This is like the cube deck I always want to draft. It's got Underworld Breach with Brain Freeze and Black Lotus, with the combo being you play Breach, you Brain Freeze yourself, play Lotus out of your graveyard, play Brain Freeze out of your graveyard, basically deck yourself, then deck them, and then Ancestral them to death if that's what you need to do. And it's also a Lurrus companion deck. So you notice that the Vault Key combo slots in nicely to Lurrus deck. So this deck's got a couple paths to victory, Breach Brain Freeze being one of them, Vault Key being another. And it can also get, some beatdowns going with Urza Saga tokens and Lurrus with Paradoxical Outcome there to draw a lot of cards.
There's an interesting metagame call in Mark's build of this deck, and it is the 4 Dress Downs. Dress Down has anti-synergy with Urza Saga if you're trying to go for constructs. But generally, this deck uses Dress Down as a way to just buy that one critical turn to win with Breach. And if possible, play it over and over again with Lurrus if you need to.
I mean, Dress Down actually really mitigates the Atroxa play from Oath. If you cast Dress Down in response to Flash, for example, they just won't put their Atroxa into play, but you just cycled your Dress Down, you drew a card, their Flash is done. You could also Dress Down in response to Oath trigger, and they can put an Atroxa into play, but they won't draw any cards. The ETB effect will not happen, which, as you mentioned with Lurrus, you can actually just recycle that every time they try to put an Atroxa into play, depending on how much you can stack up. I guess Lurrus itself doesn't let you cast it in response, but it's a powerful engine. And unfortunately for Mark, the opponent he's facing here on Dredge, Dress Down is a little bit less effective here.
This is not what that card is for this matchup. We're seeing for the first time on the table today literal Dredge. We talk about bizarre archetypes as being Dredge occasionally. That's because this is really one of the progenitors. This is a build that has something old and something new, right? Typical Dredge appearances by all the standard dredging creatures, Golgari Gravetoll, Stinkweed, Imp, Shambling Shell, etc., and the ones that come back, Prized Amalgam, Narcomoeba, etc. But this version has a little bit more of a reanimator feel to it, with a copy of Gristlebrand and Terror of the Peaks, along with 4x Dread returns in order to bring them back more reliably. This is a kind of a spicy variant.
So what this deck is doing with this Terror of the Peaks is, once you have reanimated Gristlebrand with Dread Return and drawn basically your whole deck, or drawn enough cards, you can Dread Return back Terror of the Peaks and then Dread Return back like your Golgari Grave Troll and do a ton of damage to them. And if you actually have the capability of getting the Terror of the Peaks before the Gristlebrand, even better. So it's a way to kind of one-shot your opponent after you've drawn a bunch of cards.
Players are off to the races here, and it looks like Ben is on the play. So we'll see how this game starts out. There's the ubiquitous Bazaar of Baghdad, and Ben has discarded what looks like Stinkweed Imp and something else under it that I can't quite recognize. Might
Looks
be
like an Icarid.
Is that an Icarid? Okay. And then there's another Stinkweed Imp. And for those of you who aren't familiar with this play area pattern, is what I would call it, Dredge players frequently just use their graveyard as a zone that is directly in front of them and splayed out, because it is the most active zone in their game. And that's what Ben's doing.
So Ben's
Whereas,
on the double Bazaar draw, which you do always fear. But one of the things that Ben chose in deck building here, one of the things he's given up is he doesn't have Force of Will or Force of Negation.
mhm.
So we're in a spot where Mark playing combo is knows that the way is clear. Post board, Ben's got some Force of Vigors, but he just eschewed all the blue cards and is just going for kind of max speed and consistency with hand disruption, 4 copies of Grief and 4 copies of Cabal Therapy. So Mark has an opportunity here, and in fact, he's going to get to do some pretty good work on turn one here with Emerald Soul Ring Mox Opal, Ancestral off the Mox Opal, and then has Manifold Key to untap the Mox Opal and cast
Wow.
Flusterstorm. So there's Tolarian Academy. So Mark has access to about 1,000,000 mana here, and no paradoxical outcome to just win on turn one, but this is still pretty impressive.
It's a lot of advantage, but Luis, do you value the getting the Saga online here or the Academy?
Well, I think what Mark's going to do is crack the Pyrite Spellbomb draw and see kind of where that puts him. Underworld Breach doesn't quite get you there. So the question is, do you want Academy to make 1,000,000 mana or Saga? You don't really need the Academy here. And you can use Manifold Key to untap your Mox Opal, so you still have a Flusterstorm up, which actually can be a card you want to play against Dredge, though it looks like Mark is just going to untap the Mana Vault, and that might mean he's playing Attack Academy, or he's just content to not have Flusterstorm up. It's not that Flusterstorm really stops them either, because they often Cabal Therapy you before casting Dread Return. Okay, so you got to live through this turn
And
two
so it is.
on Ben's turn.
Yeah.
So Stinkweed Imp, Milling 5, and this is on upkeep, so that Ben can also dredge on his draw step here. And
And this would be in response to the Egrid trigger. So,
yeah, I would
yep.
imagine the Icrid
Now
is
Ben has access to what he likes to exile.
the good thing for Mark though is he doesn't really care if Ben makes him discard cards. None of the cards in his hand are that active. I mean, I guess the Underworld Breach is something, but he's not that concerned about it, especially since he can
But
go get
that's why
Lurrus.
Lurrus.
But there's a good chance Ben just wins this turn. I mean, he can find if he finds Dread Return and Gristlebrand and enough creatures, which Bridge from Below can help with that. Depending, if you have like 2 bridges, you can sack your creature to flashback Cabal Therapy, get 2 tokens. Now you have 3 creatures and you Dread Return. So we're dredging Stinkweed Imp, and we've hit a bunch of Cabal Therapies and bridges at the very least.
Only one Narcomoeba so far, but he's got 5 more to go.
There's another
There's
one,
another.
and a lot of Bridge from Below. So I don't know what Ben's exact graveyard he's working with here. I haven't spotted the Gristlebrand, but it well could be in there. If he can find Gristlebrand, then he can go this turn because he's got Cabal
At the
Therapy, and I
very
assume he's
least,
got Dread
he's got
Return.
but he's got an incredible amount of resources no matter what. Mark's mana situation is incredible from a quantity and quality standpoint, but yet he doesn't have the win in hand. And he could very well get one more turn. And Ben's about to know that. Cabal Therapy announced here.
Yeah, I'm not seeing Gristlebrand. I'm assuming Ben's going to be able to completely demolish Mark's hand here between Cabal Therapy and if he wants Dread Return on Grief. And there's basically no way Ben doesn't win next turn. So Mark just has to hope that his top card, if his top card is Paradoxical Outcome, he wins. Time Vault, he wins. Lurrus, he could bring back and play Lurrus, but I guess if his top card is Black Lotus, he also has Underworld Breach outs here. Because Lurrus, playing Lurrus, you can all replay Underworld Breach off of Lurrus. And Ben is for sure going to make him discard this Underworld Breach, I would imagine. Oh, there's the Gristlebread. Never mind. Ben could potentially win
Oh wow.
this turn. In fact, he almost assuredly will.
He's counting his library now, knowing just how much dredging he needs to do to see 100% of it. And here it is. This is kind of the end game that you described in its entirety, because given the presence of X number of dredgers in his discard pile, it can be deterministic that he mills his entire library here.
And then Dread Return back. You can Dread Return back Golgari Grave Troll with first get Terror of the Peaks, then get Golgari Grave Troll, then sacrifice the Grave Troll to Cabal Therapy, then Dread Return the Grave Troll again, and that's just 20 damage. So it turns out that Mark needed the turn 1 kill to win, because the double Bazaar hand is sick. And this exact scenario is why Ben is comfortable giving up Force of Will, because his deck didn't have Force of Will. He couldn't have stopped Mark's turn 1 win. Mark didn't have a turn 1 win, and then Ben had a turn 2 win.
And it's worth noting that he doesn't really need Force of Will from a defensive standpoint, because he has so much disruption via Grief and Cabal Therapy the turn he wants to go off. And even in the intervening turns.
Yeah, basically, he wanted all his disruption cards to be black creatures,
I think
so they
that was a
work with
on Terror of the Peaks.
Yep.
Ben going through the motions.
Yeah, and
He's
using the
done
correct
this.
amount of dredging versus drawing, just to make sure he goes to exactly 0 or close to 0, whatever it is he wants. All right, so here comes the Narcomoeba. That's his hand.
And I think you don't build a variant of Dredge like this without a fair bit of intentionality and practice. So he knows how to get down to just what he wants in his library.
All right, here comes Terror of the Peaks, and Ben started to speed up here because he's just demonstrating the win. The funny thing is, it's not even clear that Mark would be able to win on his next turn, but of course, there's no real reason to give him the opportunity to.
Mm-hmm. There we see Terror of the Peaks on screen. Not a common feature of Vintage, so it's understandable if our viewers aren't necessarily familiar with it. Note that the last 2 words on that card are any target.
And here comes Dread Return, getting back Gristlebrand. Also, all the bridge tokens with Terror of the Peaks also do the thing. So,
Right. You don't even have to go through the Grave Troll if you have sufficient fodder.
Well, textbook draw from Dredge there with the double Bazaar hand is always fearsome, and that's why this was one of those games where were Mark on the play, maybe he would have won the game. But Ben wisely won the die roll, and now time to look how much hate does Mark have in his sideboard. He's got on the
It's
low
not
end.
a lot.
He's got 3 copies of Pithing Needle, which can name Bazaar Baghdad and basically stop Ben from doing anything. Ben has his own force of vigor to try to fight back against those, but leading with Needle on the play is usually an effective strategy. And that's about it, though. Besides those needles, Mark went pretty light on Dredge hate, which I think is a very reasonable choice. You get a lot out of having an extra 4 or 5 sideboard slots, but then you play against Dredge, and sometimes you're a little fearsome there.
Worth noting, too, that this Dredge deck is probably the fastest Bazaar deck in the room today. And it's interesting to note that Mark also has no real recurring anti-graveyard technology. He doesn't have, for example, Soul Guide Lantern to recur with Lurrus. So
Yeah,
he
doesn't
really
have a
isn't
single piece of
removing
graveyard hate.
Yeah, that's fascinating to me. Now, you already said it. Ben, on the other hand, has access to Force of Vigors, and those are doubtless coming in. Sickening Shoal is there to remove key creature-based hate, but you have to predict that that Ben's not going to expect that. So my guess is that simply that we're going to see combination of Force of Vigor and perhaps some of the Strip Mine package.
Yeah, I mean, against Urza Saga decks, Wasteland and Strip Mine always are a little appealing, especially when you're on the draw. Maybe you can trim on some other stuff. The other thing is, I'm not sure how many noxious revivals Ben needs if he's not
Yeah.
playing against Wastelands. But look, Ben opened on Leyline of the Void because that does
Fascinating.
make Underworld Breach a blank and Lurrus just a 3 mana 3/2 lifelink. That being said, Mark's deck is capable of winning with Vault Key or Paradoxical Outcome, so it's not that Leyline of the Void is game over.
Absolutely. So Ben has cut off a couple of key tactics for Mark, but it's not a deal breaker.
And of
It
course, Ben does have
does
that Bazaar.
depend on how Mark's hand lines up, though. He has Lorien in Force.
Huh, interesting. So Mark chose not to play turn one Mox or Mana Vault and leave up PO or any of those things. So
You think that's out of respect for Force of Vigor?
I think so. If he doesn't want to get Force of Vigored until the turn, maybe he's looking to go for PO. The other thing that you can do is play your artifacts past the turn. If Ben goes for paradoxical or for Force of Vigor, you paradoxical outcome in response. If Ben doesn't on his upkeep or during his turn, you can cast paradoxical outcome and Force of Vigor can't be cast on your own turn. All right, so discard of Dread Return, Grave Troll, and Icarid. Not the scariest to start out with, but Mark doesn't have infinite time here. He knows that next turn is going to be a big one. So what he's hoping to draw is basically a 0 mana artifact so that his paradoxical outcome can get a little bit more juiced.
Interesting to consider how Ben views the pace of this game, given that Mark played no accelerants on one. He might be intuiting that Mark's holding them, as Mark truly is. But I wonder if he's going to go full speed this game. Well, we'll see how Mark's second turn goes.
Oh, well, that's
Ooh,
a
he
huge
found the
change.
needle.
Yeah. Drawing a Pithing Needle is going to be a pretty big play here, though not having you kind of want a time walk, but then you don't have a blue card for Force of Will, so I'm kind of curious how Mark plays this. I guess you have Paradoxical Outcome if you need to protect your Pithing Needle.
Yeah.
But the fact that Ben didn't do anything there, I think you probably just go for the Paradoxical Outcome here.
Yeah, an
I mean,
outcome for 3 here. It turns you a profit. It's perfectly good.
yeah, really the question is how scared of Force of Vigor are you? And I think Mark, I don't know, you can't just assume they're always going to go for it. In fact, you should even bounce your Pithing Needle because if you're able to play Pithing Needle and name Bazaar again, there was no time when Ben was going to be able to use it.
Sure enough, you were right. 4 cards, another outcome and Flusterstorm, plus Vamp Tutor. Mark certainly seems to be rolled up here for options. Because he could, if he's feeling deterministic, he could vamp into another PO here. But he's already played his land drop for this turn.
Yeah, he did hit another Paradoxical Outcome. So yeah, that play of Vamp and then cast Outcome is good. It kind of just depends on how he wants to win this game. I think that he's got not in the bag, but very close to it because you also have Force of Will and Flusterstorm to protect your Pithing Needle, which means that Ben's going to be limited to the slow dredge of one Grave Troll, then one Stinkweed Imp if he hit one, and then that's it.
You don't get to be 5-1 in an event like this without having some confidence in your deck. So I'm interested to see how Mark feels about his options here. Oh, interesting. Okay, the double needle.
Yeah, so the first Pithing Needle names Bazaar. I wonder what the second Pithing Needle names. All right.
Oh, okay. My guess is they were both bizarre because this was
Yeah.
his plan all along.
And here's another
For
outcome
you
for
on
5.
camera,
We're
you
out
have a
of
chance for a
blue.
style name there.
But if we draw a Mox Opal or Sapphire or Lotus, we can keep going. And if not, you can just play all your Moxes, play your Needles, and have a Force of Will to protect them.
It's ironic how tenuous this situation still is for Mark. Because of the ley line, his primary paths are not easy anymore. And because of the omnipresence of Force of Vigor, Ben is still threatening at every moment despite Double Needle.
So one is named Bazaar. You don't really need to name Bazaar on the second because one Force of Vigor would take them both out, both the Needles out. So you might have named like Wasteland or Strip Mine or something. I don't know.
Perhaps Street Wraith. Street Wraith is a good
Yeah,
play.
that's also Street Wraith. So Grave Troll flips over two Narcomoebas and didn't bring back Icarid because he couldn't. And then looks like that's a pass here from Ben. Yeah, not a whole lot he can do.
Sure enough. Here's that vamp for Mark. This will tell us a lot about how he views the rest of this game.
Well, if he had Vault or Key, he could just get the other one.
Hmm.
If he doesn't, he can still get a paradoxical outcome to draw 6 cards and generate a bunch of colorless mana.
Worth noting, his list doesn't play Tinker, which these Lurrus Saga decks tend not to. As you said, looks like he had A plus B. This is the ultimate Force of Vigor test here.
Ben's like, okay, just show me your win condition. And he's like,
Points to Lurrus.
Lurrus, and he's like, oh, I've got 2 Narcomoebas.
That's right. This is kind of an awkward situation, isn't it? Because those 2 Narcomoebas do blank Lurrus, and then Lurrus combined with Leyline of the Void means Lurrus doesn't get to just do whatever it wants.
And
Oh,
so basically,
so
what they're doing
so
is Mark is getting to basically draw his deck here by taking infinite turns, and he has to decide. Okay, he's just going to play Urza Saga,
just
and
show
that'll
him
be
an
a win
Urza
condition.
Saga, yeah. A little bit suboptimal of a end game there in terms of the realities of infinite turns, but we got there. I can't imagine anything changes for these players post sideboard, really. I mean, Ben has now confirmed Needle, but there's no way he wasn't expecting that.
I mean,
If
if
not
it wasn't Needle,
100%,
it
he
was
was almost certainly
something
on it.
else, right? That it
Yeah.
was some other
Yeah.
artifact. Like you're going to have all your forces in.
And for Mark, I mean, the willingness of Ben to bring in Leyline of the Void, I think, is actually the most interesting piece of information. Not how to respond to it exactly, but just the presence of
Well,
it.
Mark has constructed a very lean deck here. No excess fluff, and he was very targeted with what he wants to do or not do. He's got no graveyard hate. He doesn't have a single way to bounce or interact with an enchantment. So Mark here can't do anything about the ley line. He can understand the presence of it and maybe side out like one copy of Underworld Breach in case he wants to hedge a little bit, but it I think he runs into a limit of how many cards he wants to bring in. Like besides the 3 needles, what else are you looking for? Like there's nothing else that even does anything. You could bring in
Y-
you by force to stop
I
hollow,
agree.
but I have always found that
Force
to
of
be
negation, perhaps, since it does interact with Dread Return, but
yeah, but by the time
it's
Dread Return
slim.
hits, you've gotten griefed or therapied that turn usually.
Yep, agree. Yeah, I'm with you. I think Mark is forced to simply respect the existence of Leyline, and he clearly demonstrated he knows how to play under it and through it. So I
All right,
expect the
so
same.
Ben started with no ley line here, but he does have Bazaar plus Grief, and Mark has a needle in his opening hand, but yeah, being on the play, getting to grief the opponent, very, very strong move. Part of how Ben's deck is
So I
constructed
see
is
Dress Down Vampiric Tutor. Oh, sorry.
Manifold Key.
I see Dress Down Vamp, Underworld Breach. Yep. And then a land and a ruby.
So, I mean, presumably Ben takes the needle unless he's got an answer to it otherwise. Could also take the Mox Ruby, but that seems a little bit speculative. So one of the things I really like about how Ben's deck is constructed is I feel like Dredge has a pretty high game one win percentage, high enough that Ben is comfortable not playing any copies of Force of Will because game three, a lot of the times you're on the play and you can just do exactly what he did. Okay. You do Mox Opal as his draw. And you want to play it because you don't want to
Once
get it
again, good
discarded.
mana. Well, he especially wants to play it because it facilitates the vamp that he has.
Totally.
That was an excellent draw for Mark. Dress down, as we discussed in the pregame, not at its best here.
Well,
It does afford Mark some relief from Dread Return on Gristlebrand, though.
yeah, that is interesting because you can play the dress down in response to any discard effects, and that means Ben has to give you at least another turn, though he still gets to make you discard your whole hand. So upkeep, we're seeing another Bazaar. Here it looks like Mark did pass. Yeah, and Mox Opal, very strong draw there because he's got Breach in hand. He can't quite vamp for a Brain Freeze win. He doesn't have quite enough mana to do that. But he could vamp. Let's see if he gets Lotus. He still not doesn't have enough permanent cards in his graveyard to bring back. Okay, dredging the Stinkweed Imp with this Bazaar here. Ooh, we hit the Grave Troll. It's the big money.
That was that was interesting sequencing by Ben. He started by bizarring in response to the Icarid trigger, and then decided against it. He decided to resolve the Icarid trigger first. I think he's very cognizant of the sequence of things going into his graveyard. He might be considering Ravenous Trap here
Yeah,
with
that's the
his
card I was thinking
sequencing,
of.
which I mean, I guess yeah, but he knows Mark doesn't have that because he watched Mark play the card that he drew last turn. But I guess he's giving Mark credit for having access to things at instant speed, perhaps, and just
Well,
being extra safe.
Mark has Dress Down. He could cast Dress Down and draw Ravenous Trap off the Dress Down. So that is
Yes,
something to keep in
yes, that's
mind.
exactly it. Yep.
Mark basically forced to Vampiric here because the Cabal Therapy is on the stack right now. Ben didn't hit any Bridge from Below, so I mean, look, you have the fail case of vamping for an ancestral, but you could also vamp for just another pithing needle here and just shut down Bazaar next turn because
Well,
currently there's not much else.
let's
Unfortunately for Mark, he has to make this decision before knowing which of the cards Ben's going to make him discard, but you kind of got to imagine it's Underworld Breach that you're going to get discarded. Oh, you can just vamp for Time Vault. What am I thinking? And now Ben is on basically Force of Vigor in hand or bust.
And I think Mark has a good read that he doesn't have that because did lots of juicy targets before now.
Love it. Just a turn two Time Vault kill. Mox Opal or Mox Jet would have done it. And Ben's not thrilled by
Wow.
this. He's grasping at straws right now. You can see it, see the brain turning like, is there a way for me to win this game in any way? No, 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 there really isn't. Oh, he
Wow.
has the force. Never mind. He's got the force, so he's ready to
Oh,
go.
he has it.
Ben actually had
Amazing.
it all locked up. Never mind it.
That that was an amazing. Oh, it was 2 Force of Vigors in his hand.
Yeah. So he's going to kill the key in the
That's
ruby,
amazing.
leaving Mark with Vault and Mox Opal. Wow, the last two cards were force green card, and that is how you win. This is how he
We have
wins.
seen so many of these games come down to the wire.
Yep, and now Mark pretty hopeless. Like Ben's dredging up a storm here, even if he doesn't win this turn, which it looks like he certainly could. He's hit 3 Narcomoebas. Yeah, this game could be over this turn actually. So to recap this match, by the way, Mark had probably a turn 2 kill in game 1, or at least outs to it, almost a turn 1 kill. Ben had a literal turn 2 kill on the play game 1. And then this game 3, Mark had a turn 2 kill that Ben stopped with Force of Vigor before probably winning the game on turn 3. What a match.
This is why Dredge is the fastest Bazaar deck in the format.
Yeah, doesn't mess around with getting some Vengevines back, attacking with Basking Root Wallas. It just goes for a
Right.
throat, and the reanimate Gristle or the Dread Return Gristlebrand plan works out pretty nicely.
I can't tell if Gristlebrand is there in the yard, but given
Yeah, kind of immaterial
the kind
here.
of the light here, it could be or it couldn't be just yet.
Well, Ben also has an all foil Dredge deck because
Uh-huh.
he's a
Japanese, I might add.
Dredge aficionado here.
Mm-hmm. He thinks he's played this a few times. I am scouring the contents of his graveyard. There is Dread Return, but I simply don't see the Haymaker target yet.
I also don't see any copies of Bridge from Below, but
Interesting.
I mean, you could also just get back a Grave Troll and have it be like a 10/10 or something like that.
Absolutely.
Also, Mark is on no cards once you Cabal Therapy him if that's what you choose to do. So you have a spot where realistically he's not going to be able to top deck his way out of it. You never want to say that against vintage decks because even from this position, Mark could go, oh, draw Ancestral into Black Lotus Underworld Breach and then just win, right? But
Yep.
He's not going to have a lot of time to do that.
Ben is going for the plan that you suggested. He counted up the creatures in his graveyard. I don't know what number he reached, but it's probably 15 or so, would be a guess. There it
And
is, the
that'll do it.
handshake.
Oof.
Guess it was 17 or so.
Ben Weinberg advances to 6-1 with Turbo Dredge, a very fast Dredge deck, a little faster than Hollowvine, giving up Force of Will, and looks like it worked pretty well for him. Adding Grief to the rotation was a pretty big win for Dredge as well. And Mark Tobias here dropping to 5-2, so still has a chance, but of course you don't feel good picking up your second loss there.
That's right. And we are going to move forward into our other match for round 7, which is wow. We haven't seen it yet, Luis, but it's no surprise given the setup and how the day began. We are looking at an Oath Mirror.
Awesome.
And
And not just an Oath Mirror, an Oath Mirror where one of the players is Julian Jakobowicz, aka Juju Bean, the winner of the Legacy Eternal Weekend, and also one of the people I cube draft with just about every day. So awesome
nice.
seeing him crush it. He took down Vintage Champs. I think it was Vintage or Legacy Champs the year before. So he's certainly got quite the resume for an Eternal player. And navigating the Oath Mirror is going to be really funny.
There's a lot to say about the Oath Mirror, but we simply have to recognize the fact that Eric has brought a non-traditional creature suite to play here. Instead of the 4 Atraxa, which Julian has, Eric is on 2 Atraxa, 1 Gristlebrand, and 1 Stormtide Leviathan.
So that's an 8-mana 8/8 Island Walk. All lands are islands, and creatures without flying or Island Walk can't attack.
That's right. It's kind of a creature matchup like Initiative or Dredge, perhaps Game Breaker, but unfortunately for him, Atraxa does have said flying.
Yeah, it doesn't do a whole lot in the mirror. It's kind of a miss. And so Eric made a funny play here, and this is one that, I'm sure you played plenty of Oath Mirrors in your time. I actually don't think is kind of advisable if you know what you're playing. I don't know if these players know what each other's playing, because he went Land Lotus, Oath of Druids, Time Walk without a Forbidden Orchard, which is actually just good for Julian here, because if Juju Bean has a Forbidden Orchard, then the Oath actually works for him. Oh, this is game 2
see.
apparently. So
we're on game 2, and Julian won game 1, so the players do know what each other has, which makes that play you just described even that much more, let's call it suspicious on Eric's part.
So he's going to Force of Negation the Black Lotus. I don't think Juju's probably too unhappy about that. And
there's the
that's
Orchard.
a Forbidden Orchard. I mean, Playing
Wow.
Oath in the mirror, like, first of all, in game 2, I generally don't even have any Oaths in my sideboard. There's just no guarantee you have more Orchards than they do. Where it gets really silly is when you both have Orchard and you're just racing to make as many tokens as possible. But, I mean, JJ is just gonna be able to put an Atrox into play on turn 2 now, thanks to his opponent's, Oath of Druids.
How many times in your life can you say this in Magic or just otherwise? I played a land, gave my opponent a token, and got to search my deck for Atraxa for free. Now that's pod racing. And Julian had Lotus and Ancestral in addition to that fantastic start.
Yeah.
Wow.
So it looks like he Ancestraled on upkeep there to, or in response to top maybe,
Yeah, I think it was in response to top.
right?
Gosh, how upset was Eric that he had Boseiju and couldn't come up with the second mana to destroy his own oath? Oh, you can't do that. You
Yeah,
can't
I don't
destroy
think
your
you
own
can even do
permanents with
that.
Boseiju. Oh, rats. Oh, what a shame.
Getting a Trox off your opponent's Oath, that is a 2 free, you know?
Jeez. And there she is.
Troxa hits the board.
Quick
Let's
perusal
see.
of cards in the graveyard.
Let's see what we get off this Atroxa here.
We've seen some narrow Atraxa hits today. This isn't one of them. This is a pretty good one. Looks like we're going to get 5 cards. We got land and artifact. We got planeswalker, instant, and sorcery.
And getting the Force of Will and the Oko is already almost more than enough, but might as well get one of your Moxes, a Tinker, and a Misty Rainforest as well.
Jeez. Of note, Tinker in this matchup, post sideboard, typically threatens Portal to Phyrexia. Looks like Eric doesn't have that in his list, but Julian does. So, in addition to just generally threatening Bolas's Citadel, which Tinker typically does in this matchup, post sideboard, especially in the mirror, Julian's Tinker represents multiple things. In fact, he's stacking it right now. Let's see what he gets. I mean, there's no way he's going to get Portal Phyrexia now. There's Sphinx of the Steel Wind.
And he still hasn't tapped his Forbidden Orchard, so now he gets to tap it, give Eric a second Spirit token to make sure that he doesn't get to Oath, and passes the turn with about 1 million Force of Wills in play.
Yep.
Wow. So Sphinx of the Steel Wind's really funny in the mirror because it beats Atroxa in a fight because it's got protection from green and can't get Oko.
Incredible technology. There is so much complexity and interaction and leveling to the Oath Mirror throughout history. It's a fascinating topic. Unfortunately, I think Eric is just on the receiving end of a little bit of a not ideal draw for the mirror, and here it is,
Well,
Julian
the
running
Oath Mirror
away
is
with
so
this one.
weird because cards like Oath of Druids and Show and Tell, which are your game breakers normally, are just actually liabilities. And you end up in this weird spot where you're both just playing kind of like Oko control decks and hoping to land a Tinker or an Oko through all your opponent's counter spells. It gets pretty silly, especially in game 1 when both players have max Oaths in.
And Eric just has nothing to do with these tokens, right? Some people might be inspired to say, "Oh, I'll swing with your tokens, get some damage in, or try to get them blocked, or whatever." Except both of Julian's creatures have lifelink, and so it's also just there's just there's just no advantage to be gained here.
Something we don't know since his Dividing Top, but
Yeah, there
somewhat
was
immaterial.
Julian's just going to take this 2 damage. This is what I was
I
talking
mean,
about.
Julian could actually Oath again next turn and get another Atroxa, though. I think that there is no particular reason to do that. Like, there's no reason to risk the very small percent chance of getting decked when you have 13 points of flying lifelink in play and a bunch of you have more Force of Wills than your opponent has cards in hand.
Hmm. Let's see what Julian drew. Demonic Tutor.
You can go get time.
Insult to injury. Oh, pause. Ben says, "Hey, I've got more life in me. I topped it to Force of Will. See? Enjoy your last spirit, Eric."
and Flusterstorm, which that means that Juju can't win on this turn, but he's just got the face up Force of Will
I
and
was
pass
just
the
gonna say,
turn.
face up the force of will. There's no surprise. I mean, Eric knows what's up, I'm sure. Eric's thinking, what could the top of my deck hold here? Glacial Chasm. Well, it's a handshake.
And the Bean advances to 6-1, going to rack up on his way to rack up another title here at Eternal Weekend. So, got to be feeling pretty good about that. And that'll be it for round 7 here. That was a very
And
interesting round.
very much so. We saw an explosive matchup with the fastest dredge deck in the world, and then the bizarre conclusion to an Oath Mirror, which is always interesting. And now, Luis, I think we're saying goodbye to you for the day, are we not?
Actually, unfortunately, that's for the weekend.
Oh,
I was pinch hitting here on Friday. The weekends are a little tougher for me to swing, but I want to give a huge shout out to Card Titan for having me on, and for Anu for doing all the coverage. Of course, Jeff as well on production, and yourself and Steve. It was a pleasure doing coverage with the two of you. I'll be watching the rest of the weekend. Shame I couldn't make it, but maybe next year I'll be there in person. We'll see.
so happy to have been here with you, Luis. Thank you, and have a great time. To all the rest of you, we'll see you again soon for round 8.